So good morning, my friends. It is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025, and this is a daily brief. The big story is that invasion into Belgorod is real. I'm going to talk about it 100% confirmed. I'll talk about that extensively as we go through this. Okay, let's start here. 1060 Russians off the battlefield, 12 tanks, 14 armored fighting vehicles, 64 artillery systems, 111 vehicles and fuel tanks. Now that 111, the total number of 1060 Russians off the battlefield means that the average in March is 1248. It was 1247 in February, so it's very similar to where it was just last month. Russia launched 145 Shahed drones. A total of 72 were shot down. Another 56 were lost in location. We're going to talk also about, and I'm not doing it in this video, about what happened yesterday. And this, like, the overshadowing news yesterday was the phone call with Trump, and then Putin eventually, immediately, agreed to not sending drones to hit infrastructure, and then immediately hit infrastructure. And I'll talk about that in a totally different video. That'll be the very next thing I talk about. So be looking for that, but I'm not going to go into that. I try not to duplicate in any video, or if I do show something, I'll claim like, hey, I showed this yesterday. Here, I'm showing this again, but I try not to do that. Okay. Skilled Russian military shot down a Ukrainian drone, only to later realize it wasn't a Ukrainian drone at all, but they still pretended that everything was going according to plan. So yeah, that happens. Ukrainian HIMARS strikes North Korean artillery systems in the Kursk region. The Ukrainian attack on the Unsha oil pumping station resulted in complete destruction of 110 kV Vyosky substation, cutting off its power supply. LPS Unecha is a key hub for oil transport in the Druzhba pipeline, Ust-Luga, a major export route for Russian oil. Another Russian oil depot and transfer point got struck last night. The facility has been burning all night and into the day. Fire erupted at the Kavkazskaya oil depot in Russia's Krasnodar Krai after a drone attack. Blaze covered 20 square meters, damaging pipeline between storage tanks. Okay, so that's what happened with the Ukrainian drone strikes at Russia last night. And again, the deal was supposed to be that you'd stop hitting, Russia would stop hitting Ukrainian energy and infrastructure, and Ukraine would stop hitting the oil infrastructure in Ukraine or in Russia. And but that never actually even lifted off the ground. Like Putin said he would do it and then violated it immediately. And there was no time to start the agreement. So the hits just keep coming. So look at the front lines. And this is what you really want to know about. I'm going to talk about Pokrovsk, and then I'll talk about what happened with Belgorod. So in the Pokrovsk direction, 29 times the enemy attacked. Now, this 29 figure is often correlated with this very low figure here of 1060. Like, the lower the casualty numbers, the lower the numbers of attacks in Pokrovsk, and those tend to be correlated over time. Okay, this is what we really want to talk about. Ukrainian forces have advanced across the border into the Russian Federation in the northwestern part of Belgorod region, or Belgorod. Putin regime forces are fighting defensive battles around the villages of Demdivka and Horivka. Okay, it's not a lot. It's over the border. Here is the line for the Russian border and the Ukrainian border. And here is the Demdivka and Horivka. It's just these first couple of villages over here. But they had to withdraw. So they withdrew somewhat up here, and they had to withdraw and put stuff somewhere. So they just spread it out over the line and then started attacking over here. I don't know how strong the fortifications are. We're not in Belgorod as like the city proper. It's just the outlying villages, but it is 100% over the border back into Russia. Z channels are whining that two AFU brigades have entered Belgorod Oblast. This was yesterday. Like I'm telling you this, I showed this one yesterday. Map changes for the 18th. This is Andrew Perpetua, I think, was originally posting this of the Ukraine daily update. Ukraine launched an attack into Belgorod near the cities 20 kilometers south of Guevo. Okay, so it's there. It's legit. Now, what's interesting is if you go back far enough, you see a map like this. Belgorod is Ukraine. Well, it kind of is if you look at a map from long enough ago. Here's Belgorod within Ukraine. And you know what else is interesting about this? Here's Krasnodar Krai in that map of Ukraine. So yeah, Krasnodar Krai. So maybe the Ukrainians should be agitating for, part of the deal that they get Krasnodar Krai as well. Okay. So that's where we are. Now, Trump yesterday was reportedly, like before the phone call, we were a little nervous. This was Kyiv Post talking about how Trump is reportedly considering recognizing the annexed Crimea Peninsula as part of Russia, as part of a potential peace agreement and the war in Ukraine. We don't know that that's not still on the table or in his head or anything along those lines, but the phone call yesterday could have been worse, and it kind of was worse in some ways. Like here's Putin was talking at a meeting with some big business leaders, and he was talking about like, oh, don't you have a meeting with Trump? And yeah, we'll get to that. Well, he kept Trump waiting for an hour, which is kind of an alpha male kind of move, right? And then Trump was talking about how his phone call conversation today with Putin, part of Russia, was very good and productive one. We agreed, and I showed this yesterday, and I showed that here. I'll talk about it in just a moment, but this is worth going back over. We're understanding that we'll be working very quickly to have a complete ceasefire, ultimately an end to this very horrible war. Okay, so what came out of this was that Putin at that time said, okay, well, I'm ordering them to stand down and not hit things, and then they hit things. It was just they weren't supposed to hit any energy infrastructure, and then they immediately hit energy infrastructure. Again, next video, I'll cover that extensively. Yesterday, I talked about this with Greg Terry. We streamed this for an hour after we were on the phone, like coordinating, comparing notes, like trying to watch, like, where's the press conference? Why isn't Trump coming out doing a victory lap? What's going on? We spent like an hour and a half on that. And then, so then we talked about this and covered everything, covered the American perspective. He was reading the Ukrainian, he was reading the Russian Telegram channels, like to see who was saying what. So if you really want to understand what happened yesterday, watch this next. Okay. Reuters reported that several this is a new topic, several U.S. national security agencies have stopped work to counter Russian sabotage, disinformation, and cyber attacks. Working groups were established by President Biden's administration to monitor the threats of Russia's shadow war against the West. The work was led by National Security Council, involving at least 7 national security agencies working with European allies. Since President Trump took office, the work has stopped. Current and former officials report meetings between National Security Council and European National Security Council officials are no longer being scheduled, and the National Security Council has stopped coordinating efforts between U.S. security agencies, according to Reuters. Okay. So that's bad. It's also part of DOGE. So in the big picture, it's part of all these cutbacks that they're trying to cut back on. Here's another one that's a terrible cut. And I'm not saying that this is a good thing. I'm saying this is in context what's happening. And now maybe it's because he's a Putin plant. I don't know. I can't say. I can't prove that one way or another. So I'm not going to say that that's the case. But it also is certainly part of the DOGE cutbacks. Okay. Trump administration is considering giving up NATO command that has been exclusively American since Eisenhower, the supreme allied commander in Europe. Yeah, that they're going to do. And again, this is part of the cutbacks that they're involved in, and why we're involved in military cutbacks when the world is going as the world is beyond me. Okay. For nearly 75 years, it has been distinctly American responsibility to have a 4-star U.S. general oversee all NATO military operations in Europe, a command that began with then World War II hero and future President Dwight D. Eisenhower. But the Trump administration, according to 2 defense officials familiar with the planning, a Pentagon briefing reviewed by NBC News, is considering changing that. Giving up the SACEUR, that's Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, would, if nothing else, be a major symbolic shift in the balance of power in NATO, the alliance that has defined European security and peace since World War II. For the United States to give up this role of Supreme Allied Commander of NATO would be seen in Europe as a significant signal of walking away from the alliance, according to retired Admiral James Stavridis, who served as the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and the head of the European Command from 2009 to 2013. It would be a political mistake of epic proportion, and one once we give it up, we are not going to get. They are not going to give it back. He wrote, "We would lose an enormous amount of influence within NATO, and this would be seen correctly as probably the first step toward leaving the alliance altogether." Okay, so that's where we are. Also prompted by the same kind of impulses that's prompting DOGE. Okay, Russia is expected to hold talks with Elon Musk about flying to Mars. Now, this isn't DOGE. This is about getting cozy with Russia, which is really interesting. Russia is expected to hold talks with Elon Musk about flying to Mars. Putin's international cooperation envoy said on Tuesday. Kirill Dmitriev, he's like a big player now in these negotiations, appointed by Putin last month as his special envoy on international economic and investment cooperation, said Russia's enemies were trying to derail U.S. President Trump's efforts to restore dialogue with Moscow. Enemies, he means Europe, and by, Dmitriev stressed that Russia wants to cooperate with SpaceX CEO Musk as part of Moscow's effort to strengthen and develop Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, and state nuclear cooperation, Rosatom. Okay, excuse me for mispronouncing things. Okay, so here's the headline in The Independent. Kremlin wants to work with Elon Musk to go to Mars. Okay, it seems like some kind of weird conflict of interest. It just seems that way to me. Okay, France and Germany vow to keep arming Ukraine after Putin demands the West stop. I don't think there's any appetite in Europe to stop arming or supporting Ukraine, regardless of what the U.S. does. So Trump's kind of losing some leverage there. Europe must rearm and rearm fast, the Danish prime minister warns. Europe has 3 to 5 years to become self-sufficient in defense or risk an attack from Russia. Okay, now I've seen this headline, Europe has 3 to 5 years, for the last 2 years. So, I mean, it's still within the window, perhaps, but it's like saying we're urgent, but we don't have to do it quite yet. Okay. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene was in Congress, and she was talking about the Nazis that run Ukraine, and then she ran into Dr. Snyder. Timothy Snyder is a Yale historian, and I just want you to hear what she says and then what he says.
Time also put together a piece only 3 years ago, and it's quite an extensive video that gives full information about the Nazis in Ukraine and their recruitment efforts that go all around the world. It's amazing to me that just in a few years' time, it's now considered misinformation to talk about the Nazis in Ukraine.
On the question of Nazis, I've written 2 books as a historian about Nazis and the Holocaust. On the question of Ukrainian nationalism, I am the leading scholar of that subject in North America and have been writing about it for 20 years. If the chamber is interested in the degree of far-right participation in Ukrainian politics, you can be assured that no far-right party has ever crossed 3% in Ukrainian election. So of course there are bad people in every country, but by any comparative standard is a very small phenomenon. In Russia, on the other hand, the army includes openly Nazi formations, such as Rushich. The government itself is fascist in character, and it is carrying out a war which includes deportation of children by the tens of thousands, the open intention of destroying a state, as well as mass torture. So if we're looking for fascism, and if there is anyone who is sincerely concerned about halting fascism or racism, you would wish to halt Russia.
Okay, how about that? So that was a pretty good answer. Michael McFaul posted this, more evidence about how Trump's embrace of Putin is not supported at all by the American people. I've said this and said this and said this. If you look at the polling, this is an NBC News poll that finds the same results as our own UMD poll did a day before. 61% of Americans sympathize more with Ukraine compared to 2% with Russia. So it's not like, so here's a 61% and here's the 2%. So it's not like there's a lot of people running around going, yeah, we want Russia to prevail. It's not like that. Now, what happens on the right is something different. It's not we're pro-Russia they'll say things like, well, this isn't our issue. It's Europe's war. It's over there. Why are we paying the bill? That's what you'll hear on the right, but it's not pro-Russian sentiment. So while I'm just trying to explain, because I know that only about a third of my audience is American and 2/3 are European or otherwise international, Canadian, Australian, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's pretty important to understand that 61% stands with Ukraine and it's only 2% with Russia. Okay, just a couple things. I think I didn't show this, but I honestly can't remember at this point. It's so many things trying to keep in my head. Forbes, Russian bombing accuracy plummets due to Ukrainian electronic warfare. Ukrainian-made Lima is among the jammers disabling Russian glide bombs by attacking their GLONASS navigation system. So, okay, if I did show it, I apologize, but it's still worth talking about. Here, Andrew Perpetua says it's fascinating how drones have become a way to recycle old weapons. And here we're talking about glide bombs, right? So you have mortar shells that are too low to fire from tubes. You have recycled aircraft bombs and missile warheads. You even see recycled FPV drones gathered and rebuilt into new drones. Drones allow you to make use of every available resource. It's actually a pretty efficient way to wage war, and they turn very cheap weapons into extremely dangerous precision-guided weapons. And when we're talking about glide bombs are just dumb bombs that have like a glide package on it that can actually move it where it needs to go. So it's the same kind of thing. Okay, Lithuania also sends Ukraine cutting-edge AI drones that don't just avoid Russian jamming, they overcome it. So here's the GA-10 FPV AI boasts advanced anti-jamming technology, precise lock-on target capability, 3-kilogram warhead, and striking range of up to 20 kilometers. Again, drones are evolving, and AI is going to be the next iteration after what we have on the battlefield now with the fiber optics. Okay, delivery bots are here. No more awkward small talk. I'm waiting for my new microphone. It should come today. I'm going to make sure that there's nothing that's making a weird sound like it did the day before yesterday, and then we'll be on to the new one. But yeah, it should be delivered. Well, it's not going to be delivered by this guy, but yeah, this is the future. Delivery bots like this. How about that? Give it some time. Finally, last couple things. Darth Putin says, this is a difficult time for my trolls. They spent 119 days saying Ukraine should accept unconditional ceasefire. Now they have violated it anyway. That'll be my next video. We'll talk about it. And let's make today count. This is a Ukrainian drone operator. That's what the image I'll leave you with. Thank you, my friends, for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.